Well, it certainly seems that the Trump administration is gaining momentum in its quest to negotiate trade deals before the August 1 deadline. If we look at the deal that was announced with Japan yesterday, it's clear that these are good deals for the U.S. in the sense that the U.S. is raising tariffs by significant amounts and therefore accomplishing the goal of the Trump administration, also by getting increased investment that addresses the trade deficit. Some could argue that the concessions being offered are perhaps not as significant as they might have wanted, but they are getting, for example, Japan $550 billion in investments, as well as concessions on rice imports and also on auto safety standards. So these are meaningful deals in a sense. And the deal with Japan was the most substantial negotiated yet in terms of trade volume.
In your view, does it seem like the deal with Japan is better for Japan or better for the United States?
It represents a compromise on both sides. Japan's initial position was that it wanted the removal of all U.S. tariffs, which of course it did not receive. But a key issue for Japan was the tariffs on automobiles, which were at 25% from earlier in the year. So Japan received a reduction to 15% on autos and also received an overall reduction from the proposed 25% reciprocal tariffs to 15%. So that is a substantial improvement over the initial conditions Japan was facing. It's also the lowest reciprocal tariff rate that's been negotiated to date with a country that's running a trade surplus with the U.S. But make no mistake, 15% tariffs are still a significant blow for the Japanese economy. So, things were given and things were gained on both sides.
Hey, there was a Bloomberg story, Kristi, out this morning. It included a quote from Trin Yuen, senior economist for emerging Asia at Natixis. And she said, we live in a new normal where 10% is the new zero. And so 15% and 20% doesn't seem so bad if everyone else got it. And she's talking, of course, about tariff levels. She went on to say that a 15 to 20% tariff level, it's still profitable for U.S. companies to import from abroad rather than produce similar goods at home. So wait a minute. I thought these trade deals were about bringing back manufacturing and supply chains to the U.S. and investment back to the U.S. Is that going to really happen?
Well, on your initial point, it is true that the Trump administration has managed to reset people's perspectives on what constitutes reasonable tariffs. So, what we see with Japan, for example, would have been considered horrific, and the minimum 10% that seems to be on the table is also shocking by previous standards. But it is true that in the longer term, it's still up in the air whether these tariffs will really achieve the goal of bringing investment and jobs back to the U.S. in a substantial way. These tariffs are not necessarily the best tools to do that. And it also is very difficult to predict how companies and others will react to them. So we can only really see the short-term consequences in terms of rising prices for consumers and also the revenue that it will generate in the short term. But companies and others will adjust in unpredictable ways, and it won't necessarily mean that they will come back to the U.S.
The president has talked about trade deals and economies opening up to the United States. In your view, was the Japanese economy closed to the United States? I mean, certainly from an automaker perspective, it's been a few years since I've been in Japan, but I didn't see any American cars on the roads of Japan. They were all Japanese cars there. But has the market been closed to the U.S.?
In general, tariff barriers in Japan are not significant. Japan has had open trade with the U.S. for a long time. But you're correct that on sensitive products like agriculture, there have always been high tariffs. That's not unique to Japan. So rice did become a significant issue in the negotiations. On autos, the main issue there is more complicated. So the concession that was given in the agreement related to auto safety standards, which have long been perceived to be a non-tariff barrier that have made it more difficult for U.S. automakers to sell in Japan because they have to meet different safety standards. But there are a host of market factors that make U.S. cars less competitive in Japan that won't necessarily be addressed by these changes. So, there are areas, in short, where Japan's market has been rather closed. But on the whole, companies face relatively open conditions on a relatively free and fair playing field.
We've seen some reports about the EU seem to be maybe working, getting closer to a deal with the United States. We've got China next week. Just to wrap up, just remind everyone why having trade deals with these big trading partners is important for the U.S. economy and the U.S. overall.
Well, from the perspective of the Trump administration, the issue is that these countries are running trade surpluses. So they are seen as a negotiating tool in that sense. overall, these are our major trading partners in the U.S. And so the trade volumes that are going through are significant to the economy. It's important that these relationships are maintained. It's important that from the administration's perspective, they be rebalanced in various ways. So, getting these deals ahead of the August 1 deadline minimizes disruptions to markets and to companies' activities. So it's important that they move forward.